All right. Welcome, everybody, to this Black Liberation Media special discussion with Generation Z still has the mic. I'm Jared Ball, happy to be the host. Looking forward to this follow-up to our previous discussion. We'll make sure that all the links get put in the show description at some point so all the conversations can be linked up more easily. Please, as you all come on in, like, share, subscribe, support the platform, invite others to join you. Same thing if you're seeing this later, please do the same. I want to welcome everybody, panelists, guests, those coming into the stream, and want to start off by a big shout out and thanks to Public Squared Amplified that is convening all of this. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'm going to turn it over to Josie Gonzalez, who has led this effort, and welcome. So thank you very much, Josie.
So it's Gonzalez. It's Caribbean. It's
my goodness. I'm sorry.
No, brother.
Forgive
it's
me.
Okay.
My problem.
I don't own the name. It's a colonized name, but trying to keep the number count.
No, I apologize.
No.
It's even when practiced, it's a reflexive mistake.
It is.
So I apologize.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we don't. I mean, and I'm from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we say Gonzalez. So we have our own way of saying it.
Right on. Thank you.
Really excited to be here. So just for the audience, I'm Josie Gonzalez. I am part of Public Square Amplified. We're a local nonprofit newsroom, and we're really excited to have this second follow-up. So this conversation is a follow-up to a pre-election town hall that we had on Gen Z, contextualizing the political context and the political landscape. And I'm so happy to be here. Jared moderated the last panel, and it was an amazing conversation. And I'm glad that we're back again to do this. And I hope we do more of this with the same group of people and maybe add a few to make it even more exciting. We're based in New Jersey. We cover New Jersey. As I said, we're a nonprofit news organization. Nonprofit newsrooms are expanding. I am one of maybe I'm the only nonprofit Black newsroom in New Jersey, maybe one of 3 Black women leading a newsroom in New Jersey. And when I say newsroom, please see context. We're a tiny newsroom. We're mainly volunteer driven. We have 3 journalists on the panel today. That's Zoe Van Gelder, Ishani Bakshi, and Ala Isafi. It's amazing to work with them. We're an award-winning newsroom. We've been around for about 3 years. We just celebrated our 3rd anniversary. Emma UK, Esther Paul, Brian Branch Price, Zoe, and Ishani have all won awards. We also have 2 political writers, one of whom you're quite familiar with. That is Renee Johnston, who's also our digital administrator. So the credit of our fantastic website goes to Renee. And she is also a regular writer with us, and she's manning the Q&A somewhere out there in the universe. I want to say thank you to our sponsors for today, New Jersey Civic Information Consortium and Prudential. But I also want to say just a massive thank you to Renee and Jared for having us here on Black Liberation Media. This is an amazing collaboration for us. We're big on collaborations. We're big on media collaborations with other Black newsrooms and our Black spaces. So this is just amazing to be back here with you, Jared, Renee, and everyone else as part of Black Liberation Media. We believe social media platforms, newsrooms, media corporations, the variety of spaces where you have narrative construction and stories and storytelling, they're places of colonization. And what we're attempting to do in our collaborations is to decolonize those spaces. We are driven by a mission to use journalism as a tool of civics and to create the next cadre of community journalists through an emancipatory framework, which we are using based on Dr. Ball's research and writings and discussions that he has on the Black Liberation Media platform. So I want to thank everyone. I want to set the tone for us today, which is that we come together in a space recognizing that the systems in which we sit on settled colonization and colonial constructs that are derived from acts of land theft, ethnic cleansing of a people, and the enslavement of another. So when we talk about news and we talk about media narrative construction and storytelling, we're doing it constantly to push against and to confront and to decolonize in small spaces. As Dr. CBS tells us, it's a massive, massive undertaking, but you must find those small spaces in which you can decolonize. So we're attempting to do that here and everywhere, and with the journalists that we have the pleasure of working with. So thank you, Jared. I pass it to them, the young people, to you and the young people to introduce themselves once again to this large audience. And I don't know, usually Shani starts and Zoe closes and everyone in between. So you guys can begin.
Hi, so we'll continue a tradition, I guess. So my name is Shani Bakshi. I've been a reporter for Public Square for a year now, and I'm really excited today to talk about the election, what went wrong with the Democrats, and all the different topics from the Trump appointees to the analysis of the issues that my generation cares about. And as the high school representative on this forum, I'm really excited to sort of give the high school perspective. I'm very excited to be here. So thank you, everyone.
I don't mind following Ishani. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashton. Right now, I'm an engineer in pharmaceuticals, so I work on making drugs. I love science, and that's why I do that. On the side, I go to law school because I'm interested in a career in patent law and hopefully marrying engineering and the law. Today, I'm excited to talk about a lot of the discussion points around different demographics, like what were Black people voting, how were Hispanic people voting, what does it mean for gender? And I want to talk about those things because I think it's kind of one-dimensional, and we have to start speaking to people and understanding their perspectives more. So with that being said, thank you for the time, Dr. Ball, and also Josie, and excited to getting more of a discussion.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sadie Springer. I attend Brown University, and I'm studying international and public affairs with a focus in development. I attended Columbia High School in Maplewood, New Jersey, and I was on the first panel, Gen Z Takes the Mic, and now I've returned, this time to talk about kind of the Democrats' rise towards elitism and fascism and really analyzing that. And I'm so happy and excited for this conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ana Isafi. I'm a part of Public Square Amplified. I just recently joined their team as a contributor and journalist, but I've been a longtime supporter of all of the work that they put out. I'm a graduate from Rutgers University journalism program, and my passion is community organizing. So I do that within my own local Arab and Muslim community. And I'm really excited to talk about what the world looks like post-election and where we can go from here as a generation in addressing some of our most pressing concerns. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Paget, and I am a first-year student studying health and societies and neuroscience. I grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey, and kind of just what I wanted to talk about and discuss in this panel is kind of understanding why the Democrats lost, kind of their interactions with the working class, and just understanding how Trump's policies and administration will affect higher education and the healthcare sector just in the future. So thank you, everyone, for having me here.
Hey, everyone. I'm Zoe. I'm from West Windsor, New Jersey. I'm currently an engineer. I work in building software for hospitals. So been in healthcare for like 5-ish years and also studied biomedical engineering. I'm really interested today to talk about, of course, the results of the election, but also community organizing and how we can better organize as whether that be a Democratic Party or as people believing in similar ideals feels like that's something that we can brainstorm on, especially coming off of the last panel that we had as well.
I'm Zoe Van Gelder. I've been with Public Square Amplified for, I think, almost 2.5 years now, working as a reporter and now doing social media with them. It's been an incredible experience, definitely super rigorous, and I've learned a lot from it. And I'm really excited to talk about pretty much everything that people have mentioned so far, and also exploring how Gen Z is kind of how we can start to think about claiming power in the political sphere, especially moving after the current election results. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here also. So thank you.
Right on. Thank you all very much. So one thing I did want to start off with, if we could, was a question about that. See if we could blend a couple of topics that you've all raised already. For those where this was your first voting experience, to the extent any of you are interested in sharing, I'd be interested in hearing you discuss what that experience was like. But similarly, how you all feel now, given the results, and even assessing what has become in some spaces a blame game. So several of you raised the question of assessing why the Democrats lost. There's been a lot of blame going around. So to the extent that any of you want to share, again, your voting experience, for whom you voted, how that went, and then where you all see this assessment of why, or anything regarding maybe blame you've heard or experienced. Let's see if we could start there. Anybody want to get it started on that question or a response to that?
I can speak on this a little bit.
Sure.
So I voted by mail, so I did not have the traditional, voting booth quintessential experience. I definitely went through a lot of moral reckoning with my vote, and I decided to vote for Kamala Harris. Kind of very reluctantly. I was, really considering my third party options, but I felt, especially at a university like Brown, anytime conversations about third party were brought up, it was immediately shut down as vote for Trump, constantly that rhetoric. And so that was really difficult for me. And then for the candidate that I reluctantly voted for her not to win the election, it was another kind of stab in the stomach. And then for the third party candidates to not have really even made a real impact in her loss, I realized I really could have, I still had a choice and I could have cast my vote for one of them. And this rhetoric about, third parties as completely, useless and just a way for Republicans to win the vote. In this case, it really wasn't a vote for Trump. It was just a vote for a third party candidate. So I do kind of have some regret when it comes to that. But I did feel a lot of pressure, I'd say, especially in conversations with my parents or other peers, really dissuading me from voting third party. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I attend the University of Pennsylvania, and there has been a lot of similar sentiment about kind of demonizing third-party voters. I feel like even though I also went Kamala as well because Pennsylvania was such a critical swing state, however, a lot of the blame was put onto third-party voters, and if we do really look at the statistics, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election between the two lead contenders. So yeah, definitely I felt a little bit pressured to vote for Kamala. Of course, my circumstance was a little different because I was in a swing state. And definitely there are political groups on campus. We have the Penn Dems and the Penn Republicans. And I feel like that kind of stifled the discourse for that potential of third-party voters as well. And I also feel like that stifles, meaningful critique of both parties as well. So definitely us learning to kind of see other options as well, I think, was something that a lot of students, at least on my campus, have neglected this term, and definitely something that we should revise or look to, redeem and work on in the future.
Yeah, I can jump on as well too. This wasn't my first time voting, it was my second time voting. And actually I was reflecting a lot about the parallels between those two experiences. And I think the feeling that I felt like walking into the elementary school in my small town to like vote, that like sheepish or like where you're like kind of begrudgingly going in, like during my first election where I voted, I was voting for Joe Biden, obviously, because he was the only option and Trump was just no way. And then this way, I also felt, and this time I also felt that same pressure of like, we're falling into, we're falling into this desperation of like, we cannot have another Trump presidency. But I think for me on a personal level, I made the choice to not feel that way again, and I went ahead and I voted third party. So I didn't vote for Kamala Harris, and I think a part of that is also like my environment. And I want to touch on something that Sadie said, where she said that the Green Party didn't even turn out in the way that we thought that they would, and I also had that realization, because obviously a lot of times on social media, who you follow, you kind of end up in an echo chamber, right? And so a lot of things I was hearing on social media, obviously based within my own ideologies and the people I follow, is like, oh my goodness, the Green Party is going to do it this year. Like we're gonna get funding, we're gonna get to the percentage that we need to really be taken seriously. And so when they fell flat, a little bit, it was discouraging, but then it also helped me feel like I had agency and I had choice, and I was able to do that. And it showed, I think, that as a country that we're still not ready to move past the two parties. We're still not ready to explore other political parties, other ways of expressing ourselves politically. So that's what I came out of this election with. We're not as quote unquote, I don't like the word progressive, but as we thought we were in rejecting two parties like the Democrats and the Republicans.
Anybody else want to share anything? Yep.
It wasn't my first experience voting, because I had voted earlier in the primaries this year, and I had voted for the uncommitted movement. But as my first presidential election, like Ala, I voted third party, but I voted for Claudia and Karina. But yeah, similar to what Richard and Sadie said about kind of what the campus experience was like. There was definitely like a very big anti third party sentiment overall. And I remember the day after the elections, there were a lot of people kind of either posting or like I would just kind of hear it in passing, like, well, I hope they're happy. I hope they feel good about taking the moral high ground and stuff like that. And it was kind of, I mean, I think it kind of plays into what we were saying, what you had mentioned about like the blame game and stuff like that. And I think once the statistics kind of started to dissipate in, and once it grew clear that like even if everybody who had voted third party, whether or not that third party was right leaning or left leaning, it still wouldn't, even if all of those people had voted for Harris, it still wouldn't have led to a Harris victory. I think once that information kind of like dissipated and everyone kind of understood that, it was just this sense of like quietness, I guess, on campus, at least for me. And yeah, the whole rhetoric of like taking the moral high ground and like, well, I hope all the third party voters are happy now, it kind of struck me because I mean, I was not thrilled that Trump won. But like we had mentioned in our last call about like reconciling between working within the two party system and not supporting a candidate who is so fundamentally against your values. And I couldn't reconcile that, so I chose not to. And I went with a third party candidate and went with Claudia and Karina. But yeah, that was kind of my experience. But I don't hold any regrets for voting for Claudia and Karina. And I'm obviously not happy about Trump winning. I don't even want to use the word proud of myself because I don't think it is that, but I still feel like I'm standing as firmly as I did then. I guess that's how I'll put it.
I can also add something to this one. This was my third time voting. My first time I was a freshman in college in 2016. And I think I heard a lot of the sentiment that Sadie, Zoe, and Ala mentioned that it was very anti third party. If you did that, you're stupid, whatever. So fast forwarding to maybe 2020, when we had a primary and we had Bernie Sanders in front of us, that would have been my choice for president. And then seeing him not make it to the ballot in 2020 was discouraging, but I still voted for Joe Biden. And then I think coming to 2024, when the news came out in like maybe late June, early July, or maybe it was in July. It was in July that Kamala Harris was going to run for president. I was very excited that we were going to have a Black woman in office. That was the first thing that I was excited about. In hindsight, I was excited that she was the first person that I think got to be that close to the presidency, that had her identity. And that's a big part of my excitement. I can't hide that. So going to vote that day, I was with my dad. We went to my high school in my hometown, and her name was in front of me, and I kind of couldn't believe it. And I voted for her. Not because I thought she was the best, but because she was better than Donald Trump. So yeah, I think that seeing someone so extremely qualified on the ballot was also refreshing, but then having her name buried next to someone who objectively wasn't was also kind of sobering in the sense that there's going to be a limit to what maybe I can achieve with my set of identities, when in actuality, I know that being Black has only improved my life. So there's like a lot of conflicting feelings, I think, with like how the voting went for me.
I would add to that. This is also my third time voting, and like I think the 2020, I don't know, the election before 2016, it was like really exciting to be able to vote, and I think I was really energized by the fact that I could go to the polls. Obviously, the result was extremely disappointing that time because it was the first time Trump was elected on our college campus. Like we were like very emotional and crying, etc. But just the idea of voting was really exciting. I don't know, this election, it just really wasn't excited to vote, to be honest, just because I did vote for Kamala Harris, but I don't know that I fully was excited about any candidate. And so I also went to my polls in New Jersey, in my town, and was really thinking about the idea of, and I think a few brought this up, like two-party system, and are we able to break away from that? We had additional vote in our county, which is if the mayoral candidate has to declare their political party. Right now, we have it as like in Mercer County, that the mayoral candidate does not have to declare where they stand, if they stand with like what party they're affiliated to. And the vote was to decide if we want to have them declare or not. It ended up continuing to be that you don't have to declare your political party. And I find that to be, like, as a concept, I think that's really important in terms of you don't affiliate with any party, you affiliate with your values. But at the end of the day, our country is so polarized that if you're not affiliated with a political party, then like even on a lower level, like on a mayoral candidate, they might be against abortion. And I don't know that because I don't know like where they're standing in terms of political party. I don't know. It just brought up a larger question of how do we deal with the system from a presidential standpoint, and also as you go down to different levels of like how I guess politics work and people and the people who represent us.
So did anybody want to, am I stepping on anybody? You know, one of the, I'm biased by the fact that I just am, and I'll use the word recovering from watching a new series that points itself, I wouldn't say it's about, but points itself to some of the struggles of previous generations, in particular that of the American Indian movement and its connection with the Black liberation struggle. And it was disturbing the way it was presented, but it reminded me, as I was thinking about today, that so many of what the ideas that are important to at least some of us are not overtly discussed or included in ballot decisions or election cycles, and not part of major party platforms or a lot of the national discourse. So, and in this case, political prisoners like Leonard Peltier are still locked up. And I know that there's been some recent call to get Biden to see if he can pardon him on the way out. But my point, what I'm really getting to, is that it reminded me of something I wanted to ask you all. That again, that I ask my students usually at the beginning of every semester. And now that some of you are at least approaching becoming my peer, I'm interested and still in the same question, which is, what do you all want? And I'll leave it there for the moment. But I would like for you to talk a little bit about what it is that you would want from this country or the world. And then, yeah, I'll come back after that. But I was, yeah, what do you want?
Okay,
This is often this response I get at the beginning too, a little hesitant. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
I can start. I think to start with, we can kind of talk about what we want out of this administration, because though it was not what we wanted, I think we have to still expect things out of the Trump administration and hope that both sides can negotiate on some interests. I think the main field that I think I'm really interested in is our foreign policy in the next 4 years. And I think, Trump was always seen as the less interventionist of candidate of the two, though of course both of them were going to be equally involved in the Israel Palestine genocide. So I think what I really want out of the nation is that I hope that Trump, being the non-interventionist candidate he is, actually begins to apply that to Israel, and perhaps steps back American support for Israel, which I doubt he's going to do because they're such strong allies. But I think that's one other hope I have. And considering everything else going on in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Syria, I really hope America is able to take a stance that is not all big brother, that is not imposing on other nations or violating what NATO and the East have previously agreed upon, but instead kind of works with all the different blocs that are now forming and comes to a good compromise that ensures that the US can maintain its power while not committing human rights violations and infringing on the sovereignty of other nations. And that's what I want when it comes to foreign policy. And on the flip side, I know that Trump is the king of sanctions, and same with Biden. They put so many sanctions on all the countries. But I think what has to be realized is that by putting all these sanctions, you're just isolating America. The other nations, the BRICS blocs, they will start dealing in different currencies, and regardless of Trump's threats, they will still continue to do so. As the more sanctions you put, as the more threats America gives out to these other nations, the more they're going to move away from America, and the more powerless America is going to become. I think that's obviously going to reflect inwards as well. When nation loses power on the world stage, negative things happen inside. And I think from the inside perspective, I really would like to see more bipartisanship, if anything, in the next 4 years. And I know one positive thing perhaps is that we want to cut down maybe over government spending. And I think that could be important if well done and not used as a political tool. And I think if we have some more compromises, which I know RFK is in office and he has really liberal climate policy. So I feel like if we can have these kind of different voices come together and come to a compromise on different issues, that would probably be what I want out of America this next 4 years.
I think Ishani poses a really interesting way to view this, because Dr. Ball, your question essentially was what do you want from America, which is kind of daunting. And I'd like to see, the end of capitalism and all these exploitative systems. But I think kind of honing in more specifically on I've never thought of what we could want from the Trump administration. And Ishani, at the end, you brought up climate. And I think a lot of the hope would be to stay in the Paris Climate Accord, which I don't know if that's going to happen, but the COP just happened in Azerbaijan. And for lack of better words, the Global South asked for, I think it was $1.3 trillion. It was not met. But I think I think we've agreed like 800 billion, something like that. So working towards that goal. And even if the nation is out of the Paris like climate accord, if, you know, mayoral and like smaller governmental bodies work really hard to reduce emissions in cities make up like 80% of the world, then I think even if the Trump administration is not getting the US where it needs to be in terms of climate, then we can kind of take matters into our own hands. And that gives me a lot of hope when it comes to grassroots specifically in regards to climate. And I guess I have less hope when it comes to some of the other like social issues, but yeah.
I think I can probably take it from where Sadie ended on the social issues. I want us as a country to be less susceptible to the concept of other. And my understanding is that like this is the conservative strategy to point at another group and say they're the reason you don't have as much as you want. They're the reason why you can't afford what you want, why your taxes are so high, etc. And what I want to make as an example of this is the centering of transgender issues for this election cycle. Beforehand, we had conservative legislators in the past few years passing anti-trans legislation, and we just weren't, I think, fighting it enough as a block of maybe liberals. So what I think happened was we successfully, we as the country, because we are all one country, convinced a lot of the voting bloc that this portion of the country that's less than 1%, maybe 1%, has some sort of power over the health of your children, that your children will be subject to abuse if they're near transgender people in high school, and they should be subject to certain sanctions through the law. And it was successfully othering a very small group. And I think on the Democratic side of things, we ignore the fact that 90% of Black women approximately voted for Kamala Harris. And I think that an argument saying that maybe we ignore the working class ignores the fact that Black women are largely working class. Similar, even though Black men didn't as much vote for Kamala Harris, they still overwhelmingly did. And a large amount of Black men are working class too. So I think the fact that we've othered Black people, and especially Black women, allows us to ignore that there are working class people. There are largely working class people in the Black population of the country. So I think I want us all to be less vulnerable to arguments that other people are the reason why we don't have our freedom, when in reality, there's just this giant disparity in wealth in the country that's perpetuated by the laws, by the law, money in politics, the influence billionaires can have on the election. And I think that is maybe where I'll end things, because it could go into a whole bunch of other topics too.
Yeah, I would love to add on to that point about kind of the blame game rhetoric being very harmful. I feel like the sentiment for this election and why the Democrats lost was because a lot of swing voters, they were grappling with their deteriorating finances, inflation, and kind of that sense that many blamed the Biden administration or just like the incumbent party of the time, kind of why they wanted to vote for their own pockets. And I feel like this kind of definitely ignores a lot of the discourse that we have in being critical of a lot of economic policies in the future. So definitely what I hope to get for the future, what I hope for our future is that we learn to actually be in conversation with those other parties and not permanently isolate a specific group. So
I think, Dr. Ball, when you asked the question, I'm going to answer with my first thought. I want a confession. I want a confession from the people who are in power in our country, and even on a global scale. I think everything that everyone's talking about is all very politically relevant and astute. But more than ever, after a year of gaslighting and propaganda and crazy news cycles, I think I just truly want a confession from the people in our government who are actively upholding this legacy of America, or not even a legacy. It is, in fact, who we are as a country, of being built on the back of Black slaves being built on stolen land. I want to like kind of go back to what Josie said in the beginning of her piece, that we're sitting on stolen land, and we're actively living and breathing on stolen land, is not something that, in my experience, the vast majority of Americans are even willing to confess, even willing to contend with, even willing to admit. And even though this might be simple, whenever you look at a person, the first part in addressing a problem is realizing that you have a problem. And so if we can't even realize this problem, and if America as a political body cannot confess to who they are, and in turn how that informs every single thing that we do, whether it be on a national or a global scale, I really don't think we can move on from there. So as an American, I would love a confession from the people who are in power about what truly matters, whether that be wealth, whether that be influence, whether that be imperialism, all these things that we know and we've studied. That's something that I want, and I know it's not it's not realistic, and it might not do anything, but that's my simple answer to your question.
No, right on, right on. Does anybody else want to add on to that or respond? Or
I just want to say I really felt what I just really feel is what you're saying. That's all. Please, Zoe, if you want to.
I feel like when you asked that question, like, yeah, I was also very kind of daunted by it. And when I thought about my initial answer, I kind of said, like, okay, you need to like work back. Like, what do you need to want in order to get that? Because initially I was thinking just broadly, like, I just want a safe place for everyone to be able to have self-determination, have a real democracy, and like just be able to live their lives without fear, without um, threat or anything like that. But I think, at least in the US and in the United States framework, I think what I want, because a lot of that revolves around tackling things like climate change, tackling imperialism, capitalism, the war machine, stuff like that. But I think what we need to address first, or what we need to want first, is a government that's actually representative. Um, the average salary of a person in Congress is well into six figures, and something like 35% of the US and Americans are living with $50,000 annual income or lower, and are living paycheck to paycheck and cannot afford to live in this country. And I just don't see how that's representative. How can somebody who's earning this much money to represent people understand what that means or what that is? And so, I mean, when people are looking at um, what stocks to trade in and what to invest in, some of them look to what Congress members are doing. I don't think that makes sense if we're going to have an actually representative government that works for the working class and for working people, who do so much for this country, as other people have mentioned, who are the backbone of this country. So I think it starts with wanting a government that's actually representative and that's actually made up of people who understand what it means to really live in this country, and not to live in this country with a six figure income every single year. That's what I want.
no, right on. Thank you. No, I usually just like I like to start a semester with asking questions like that, just uh, on some in to a certain extent, because I'm interested in how as I get older, young people are thinking from each, year to year, semester to semester. And I've often noticed that the it feels like, and I should have put some science to it, it feels like over the years, students' responses are more narrowly focused on individual needs. Admittedly, a lot of this is maybe somewhat situated by the students uh, that I end up with, or in their particular situations. But it seems like been an imposed narrowing on concerns from broader societal contexts down to I just need a job and something like that. So and it's a good way to start to invite some contradictions and self-reflection, critical thinking, etc., over the course of a semester. So I just thought, now, given that what I've seen, some of what you all are interested in talking about, and there's a confluence of issues here, from what issues are most pressing to you, how are those issues being communicated, what could be done going forward in terms of organizing. So one of the ways I thought I would start off a sort of discussion of some of that is to ask about one of my favorite approaches philosophically to journalism, which is emancipatory journalism, the idea of working from within politically organized social movement activist spaces to produce journalism and media that promotes the policy, the politics and work of those organizations. As you all look going forward and survey the landscape that you are all dealing with, what are some of the issues maybe that you've already brought up that you think you can help advance journalistically, in terms of your work, in terms of social media, to sort of uplift those topics, those issues, narratives around those issues. Uh, yeah, and I hope that made sense. In other words, how can you help promote, and how do you see that going? Certain ideas and issues that you would like to see addressed that maybe were not addressed or not addressed properly. Yeah. Anybody want to start off with that?
Yeah, I think for me, some of the big things that we're dealing with as a generation are obviously there are economic issues, right? Like affordable housing, having a good job. I know unemployment is going down now, but there are lots of people who are still without work. Those are all obviously like economic issues, but I think I want to go back to something that you said when you're posing your question about like the philosophy of how you of how you approach certain things, and I think it goes back to this sense of community and, like you said, emancipatory journalism. I feel like there are a lot of issues that people are working through within their organizations and nonprofit work that are really important. So like immigration, for example, that's going to be a huge thing in the future, because with Trump's new appointee, he basically has made it his mission to spearhead the biggest or like largest deportation movement in our country, in our history, which he said like verbatim, explicitly. So I think with issues like immigration and like economic issues, there's going to be a lot of it that falls onto our shoulders as organizers and working through ways of rallying up people in our communities to make sure that they feel protected and to feel like they have they don't have this like doomsday despair, I feel, which is a lot of how I've been feeling recently. So those two issues are the biggest things for me. I've been thinking a lot about immigration and economic issues, and how the role of nonprofits and community organizers, they're really going to have to step it up in this upcoming administration, because there have been a lot of clear threats to the work that they're doing.
No one else? Anyone else? Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
I mean, I was also thinking of the work that I've done with PSA, of course, as local grassroots newspaper and stuff. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think how to phrase it without echoing a lot of what Ala said because she put it very well. But yeah, it comes back, I think, to having news that's rooted in the community and having news that's being told from um, the voices that do get cast out a lot of the time. And I know Ala mentioned that the work that nonprofits are doing is getting put under attack and probably will be getting put under attack a lot more as the new administration comes in. And I know with H- HR 9495 and that bill that's getting passed, that attack only grows as it gives the higher levels of government a lot more discretion in terms of what they want to label as a terrorist organization or uh, supporting terrorist organizations and using that specific rhetoric to withhold nonprofit status and stuff like that. But yeah, so I think having this framework of emancipatory journalism is going to be so critical because and needing to platform organizations that are doing the groundwork is going to be so critical because it's becoming clearer and clearer that the larger scale media is not willing to do that and is not willing to um, center those voices and spotlight those people. So I think it needs to become about taking ownership of those spaces in the media. So I think emancipatory journalism is really good about that.
Yeah, and I guess I would add, like, I think when I'm thinking about organizing and like community organizing specifically, I feel like a lot of effective ways to do that or things around that are when we're centering ourselves around like what is the new or what is an American identity and like what does that mean for us as we go through the next 4 years. I feel like if you think about what is a Trump American identity, I think it's kind of clear what that is, and we can say that in a few words, like make America great again, meaning back to whatever it was 100 years ago and certain ideals from that. Outside of that, what is an American identity that we are thinking about? I don't think I have an answer for that, though I know that a lot of people, even though a lot of people outside of, the United States look at the United States and make fun of it or look at the United States negatively, we still have a lot of people coming here for opportunities. So there is something here that brings people together, that makes people want to be here, and that is centered around communities in some ways. But like, what is our identity around that? So I want to like challenge us to like think about it and also consider that, because even if we consider like how immigrants voted in this past election, a lot of immigrants don't believe in immigration. So that's like interesting as a concept. Yet those same immigrants would believe in community organizing on a grassroots level, whether that be considering things like food insecurity, et cetera, because they are from a working class background as well. So it's like almost like we have a loss of sense of self, and that would propel people who might, if they had that sense of self, might not agree with the things that they think they agree with and stand for right now. I don't really have an answer for it, but that's like what I'm thinking about when I'm considering sort of community and organizing and spaces around that.
I think what Zooey is reminding me of too is continual engagement with people who might not have the same point of view as you. I have family members who are immigrants who are pro-immigrant, who maybe think about the fact that they got here first as in they did it the right way, whatever that means. But I don't shy away from those conversations because I know that, well, they're going to tell me their experience and I'm going to get to learn why they view the world this way. And I think what I'm getting at is people are viewing the world through the lens of what they've experienced. And without understanding where their logic is going, there's no way of bridging these gaps of, like, to me, it doesn't make sense why an immigrant would be anti-immigrant. But maybe this person lives in a place far away from me where their local politics make it so that they view this as an issue and that we can't have people from the outside taking resources. So I think what maybe liberals do a lot is we might assume we have the right answer universally without first learning what local pressures might be having people have the opposite point of view as you. So I think it's all about like having the open ear and like really listening to what another person's argument might be, even if you think morally they're just not in the right place at all.
Going off of that, you mentioned immigration and also like listening to people's perspectives. In my sociology class, we were talking about, post-election and, kind of playing the blame game a little bit. And a Mexican American student in my class shared with us an anecdote about her mother is not able to vote because of her citizenship status, but why her mother would have voted for Trump as a Mexican immigrant. And I, initially you're like, that's oxymoronic, and it's kind of default to kind of like shut yourself out to that and just be like, that's ignorant, or, like she doesn't have all of the information. But in actuality, I don't know, I felt like once this student explained her mother, who like she opposed her mother, but why her mother felt this way, it made a lot of sense. And her rationale was kind of like deportations occurred under Obama, deportations occurred under Biden, and like this country like isn't, this, amazing like place to begin with. And she felt that like whoever was in power, it wasn't going to substantially change that. And, her rationale was talking about bread and butter politics and talking about how like even if Trump's economic policies are not really founded, and even if there's statistics disproving them, like she couldn't financially handle another 4 years under Biden's economic policies, and Harris's campaign wasn't really clearly outlining and wasn't, was way more focused on social issues. And so like that was just a calculated risk she was willing to take. And I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about that and how the Democrats, and of course this is just one Mexican American woman, she's not representative of everyone, but how the Democrats constantly are campaigning off of these rights of these people that like they're not connected with and they're not in touch with, and they're not on the ground talking to them about actually what they want. For the same reason we saw, like, I feel like a lot of, Arab Americans voting for Trump, and there's this like just disconnect, and yet all of this like conversation around what these people want and how the DNC is going to protect them, and this fear mongering. And I don't know, I thought that was really interesting, and it's definitely impacted the way I've gone about the blame game and trying to understand like that, not everyone who votes for Trump is, just we can label them as a racist or as ignorant or as like, I don't know, a white supremacist necessarily.
To kind of add on to what Ashton and Sadie just said, and I think this is what was on my mind right after, like the day after the election, what I saw like all across TikTok, all across Instagram was these bunch of like liberal meltdowns. Like we had kids in our generation crying on camera and like posting it to the internet and like screaming. And I think that was, as a Gen Z, really embarrassing. I think yes, we can be upset about the result of an election. Yes, we can be upset about the political climate. But having a meltdown publicly and then blaming the other side and even furthering divisions is not what we should be doing as a country. So I don't know what Ashton and Sadie were saying. I think moving forward, we really need to understand the other side, because it is very important to understand that when Kamala Harris ran her election, she ran it on mainly the reproductive issues. That was her biggest thing. She was out. She got all the female celebrities. She had Beyonce. She had J-Lo. She went on the Call Me Daddy podcast. But that actually strayed really far away from what the Democrats were supposed to be, which is the party of the people. It is supposed to be a party that addresses workers, but in reality, Harris, like the party was talking really generally about optimism and like positive ideals and social issues, which, while important, didn't like just like Harris is just like I know she had child tax, and she talked about increasing the corporate tax, but that is not helping people who are the workers. People want more jobs. People therefore then look to like the Republican Party, because Trump makes himself out to be this candidate for the people. And that is what, like, think about people in rural America, or even when talking about minority groups, think like I feel like as a minority group myself, I don't think that everyone in my circle would be really care that much about like, oh, I like like less racism from a candidate. They'd care more about what the candidate has to offer when it comes to like economic option, when it comes to gas prices, and especially in the older generations. So I think it is very important to acknowledge correctly that in this election, the Democratic Party strayed so away from the people that we were kind of like inevitable that we were going to lose, because we were at like Harris was out here saying that she was for the middle class. Like, that was her whole like spiel. But in reality, she grew up, her mother was a doctor. She grew up upper middle class. She was very disconnected from her middle class, lower middle class, like the base that she was trying to attract. And I think therefore expecting a win or expecting a positive result out of a sort of disconnect would just be delusional from our end. So I think in the next 4 years, Democratic Party needs to really restructure its movement and understand whether it's going for the elite who have an interest in social problems, or if it's going for the workers who, while interested in social problems, have other issues, maybe more pressing issues to address.
Right on. Anybody else before we move on? Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, go ahead.
I want to echo what she's saying about looking towards the future. And I think it's something that we have to do that we don't want to, where Democrats need to take a look at what maybe Trump did right and kind of do some self-reflection in their own party. They had, like, the Democratic Party also had some pretty deep pockets. They had a decent amount of funding, but they kind of went about it in a traditional way where they did like ads. They did, like Ashani said, they did like celebrity endorsements. They focused a lot on like knocking on doors and just, sticking to a script of like, hey, this is usually what the political parties do before an election. I think Trump, some of the analyses that I've read about Trump's administration is that this has been like a year-round or like campaign that they've been working on, that's been organized within several different like rural communities, several different states in America. And so what that does is they've been focusing on like low propensity voters, like Sadie mentioned, people who like Hispanic people who may not go out to vote or may not go out to vote for Trump. And what they did is they try to make them feel a part of this community and make them feel that their identity is being a part of this movement that Trump is spearheading, instead of their identity as like an immigrant, instead of their identity as someone who comes from another country, instead of their identity as a minority. Instead, they use this like year-round strategic like community organizing through different organizations, like whether that be through churches, student groups, like local organizations, where they provide people with like jobs, they provide them with support, whether that be financial or like emotional or like on a community level, to help them feel a part of something bigger. Whereas the Democratic Party, or like specifically the Harris campaign this year, was a very traditional kind of like put together campaign that was just relying on people who are undecided, or people who are already on the like quote unquote liberal team, instead of targeting other communities and really building her relationship with them. So I think looking towards the future, that's definitely something that the Democratic Party should consider, of really like standing behind their values and redefining those values, and then kind of recruiting people to join that as a part of their identity, instead of their like where they come from in minorities, or where they come from like socioeconomically.
If I could add really quickly to what Ashani and Ala said, and like bringing it back to the emancipatory journalism element of it, I feel like what the media and press did during this last election cycle really fueled kind of what both of you were talking about, especially Ashani, in terms of like Harris bringing in all of these celebrities. I think also there was Trump's, there was also his assassination attempt, but then there was smaller things. There was like him working at McDonald's as some kind of get back to Harris's comment about working at McDonald's to, I guess, appeal to the working class. But overall, it seemed like the mass media really kind of just like pushed all of that and kept it going by just kind of buying into the sensationalism of it and how crazy it was, and kind of kept the public looking. That was or kept the public eye focused, because that was one feeling I kind of got from a lot of stuff that happened during this election. It almost felt like a whirlwind. Like every week it was just something new. Like first it was Harris being brat, and then it was Trump, and then it was Harris, and then it was Trump, and it was just always something happening. And I felt like that was really the work of major media and a lot of legacy media and stuff like that. But I think that's really where emancipatory journalism factors in, because we are talking so much about needing to bring community together, needing to get people, even in sub parts of communities, to kind of work out where the contradictions are and figure out how to organize. I think emancipatory journalism is the platform for that. And if, from what we're saying, it seems like both of the major parties are really out of touch with the people they're trying to appeal to, that might be the solution in terms of looking forward and looking into the future, I think.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that Trump and the Republican Party are out of touch with who they want to get the vote. You know, they got there.
In some ways, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of goes to what I wanted to ask you all about in terms of the where you all are with identity versus politics. That is that even in being reminded that "Make America Great Again" is from my youth associated with Reagan, which was again a direct appeal to the white racist attitudes of the electorate, with the idea almost in a version of what I think may have happened in this last one, where Trump seems to have basically said a reverse of what Harris said to her constituency. Trump seems to have almost exclusively promised, in a variety of ways, for lack of, to simplify, a return of white America, a return of the ascendancy of white America. And Harris's campaign, conversely, seemed to want to appeal to whether it's womanhood, blackness, world majority representation, and neither, I think, with a strong emphasis on policy. Trump may have been talking about policy, but he would just say things. Harris had a variety of messages for her various elements of her constituency. For Black men, it was crypto. For the LGBTQ community, it was inclusiveness. For Black women, it was a return of Black girl magic, and so on and so on. But very little, and this is again sort of where I was going with my question about what do you all want. The point for me also in part being, if you know that most of what you want are not things on the menu from either political party going forward, which is what I think is usually the outcome. That is, going forward, how do you all see maybe striking a better balance, from my biased vantage point, between identity and politics? That is, to move beyond sort of a liberal or apolitical identity politics to having identity inform a certain politics that can be materialized, if any of that makes sense. In other words, I'll just simply, how do you all feel about balancing identity and politics?
I'd love to talk about this one, because
Sure.
In my first election in 2016, I don't think I was left with much substance to vote off of. It was Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Donald Trump took identities and made it about hate and animus. And I think I was left with only one candidate that kind of was talking about substantive issues. And what would have made that election better for me as a voter is if both candidates were strong on their policies, viewpoints. What are the plans for the future? What was your record serving as public servant? Donald Trump wasn't number one. But I think our generation, what I'm concerned about is we don't have an experience of an election that is focused on the issues. It's instead focused on spectacle and identity, because I think, in my view, there is all that's left is really surface level characteristics. When I watched, and I guess getting into Zoe's point too about how almost the theater of the election, I don't think we need theater as a voting populace. I think we just want to know how will life get better. I watched the Republican National Convention for some reason. It was on, and it was 2 hours, and I watched it kind of horrified because of how theatrical it was. And I was horrified because it was theatrical on that side, and it was also theatrical on the Democrat side. And I realized I don't have much to go off of for voting unless I'm doing a lot of research by myself. So I think I see identity here as more of maybe a generational thing. Like, I'm hoping that we get the choice between two candidates that prioritize substance, and I'm hoping that us as a generation start to think about substance more, instead of thinking about how maybe awful it would be to have a Donald Trump candidate again. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I believe the heart of politics do lie in their policy. I feel like what Kamala and what Trump did was that they were very superficially cosmopolitan on identity politics. When people vote, they're voting for economic change, they're voting for social change. And I definitely feel like both parties definitely weaponized identity politics as a means for control, definitely without really getting into the substance of their issues. Regarding Trump's appointees, which he didn't really discuss too thoroughly in his campaign. Since I am interested in healthcare, I definitely looked into how his cabinet would shape the future of healthcare. And he recently, just something that really was jarring for me, was how he appointed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Health and Medicine's Human Services Secretary for the United States. And he is known to have an anti-vaccine platform. And some of his other plans are to fire hundreds of people at the National Institutes of Health, which oversees many facets of health research and vaccinations. And that policy, dismantling that group, is going to affect the lives of millions of Americans. And I definitely feel like this dates back to COVID and how it politicized a lot of masks and vaccines, and definitely how that's bleeding into Trump's next term. So definitely just understanding how that is going to shape the future of American healthcare. And I believe that all ties back to how both parties didn't really adequately address their policies, and definitely more pandered to identity politics. And I personally find that very frustrating. When I vote for someone, I'm voting to understand how their policies and how their administration is going to affect my life. And I feel like it was definitely difficult for me to do that in this election, because it was I feel like it was like a lot of mudslinging and ad hominem to the other candidate. And so it kind of puts a lot more effort on the voter to do their own research about policies for the future. And I think that a successful candidate should summarize what their intentions are for their next term. And I didn't really feel like I got that from either candidate, which again echoes my frustrations and why I really did consider third party as a very feasible option.
Yeah.
I hear like a lot of rhetoric around identity politics, which I think it's kind of turned into this like buzzword that I do think is like weaponized by the right a lot. But I do agree that I think Kamala's campaign, I think she like fundamentally like kind of misunderstood what the people wanted. And I don't even think you can say like she was so focused on identity, because she's talking about inclusivity and diversity and like all of these things, but then is also like very pro-Israel and is like not super concerned with all these other social issues. So I kind of felt like it was like a mirage for like what identity politics, like what the definition could even mean. But I think Josie brought up yesterday a really interesting point. I'm not sure if this was totally what she meant, but instead of like focusing on these very specific issues, as Ashton brought up, like transgender, like healthcare and stuff, like instead focusing on the system. So like, you know, working towards like a free healthcare system, and then things like reproductive rights and trans rights would like fall into that, and not like, and like I don't know, because Josie was talking about how a lot of the conversation of the election was flooded with information about like, you know, about this topic of trans healthcare, which is obviously so important, but she said, like, kind of acted as like a distraction and propaganda from like the bigger like money issues. And so I think that would be a really interesting thing, and like a restructuring, instead of focusing on these micro issues, focusing on a broader level that would be like encompassing of said issues.
Yeah, I really like that point, Sadie, of kind of looking at it almost as like a distraction, sort of. The the larger scale issues that were at stake during this election and are still at stake even though it's over, it kind of almost seems like dystopian, the fact that our attention is on the wrong things like that. I mean, we're in the middle of a genocide, our climate is dying, like, there's such major issues at stake here. I mean, the like future of what the working classes job landscape looks like. There's massive issues here. And to kind of, yeah, echo what Sadie said, like the use of identity politics just kind of came off as like distracting, and in a lot of cases it seemed like a lot of use of propaganda. One thing that I kind of looked at recently was an opinion piece by um, Adam Staniland. I might be butchering his name, but he was kind of looking into the reasons that white men specifically voted in our generation voted for Trump, and how a lot of it came down to feeling a lot of pressure from the wealth gap and what the job market prospects looked like, and kind of the need to support the idea of a nuclear family. Um, and then kind of like the flames of xenophobia were fanned by Trump, and Trump kind of appealed to their fear, and a lot of them strayed to Trump because of that. But it got me thinking, I mean, most of us here are concerned about the wealth gap. We're concerned about the shrinking job market. We're concerned about all of these things, and like the way that identity politics is used to just distract us from the fact that we, on any side of the party, it's more an issue of class and wealth distribution and stuff like that. Um, a lot of us have the same issues in mind, especially as a generation. A lot of us have major concerns in mind, um, as I've mentioned before. And so, yeah, the use of identity politics during this election, I mean, I think a lot of it was for sensation. It didn't have a lot of substance to it. Um, and we need to kind of stop taking that kind of thing, especially as it's moving into media and moving into press and stuff like that. And we need to look at the actual substantive policies at hand, and also just broader issues at hand that are going to affect our generation, instead of playing into the other kinds of politics that are thrown our way.
Yeah, and definitely one facet I'd like to look at is the current state of our economics. And me as a university student, I am personally very concerned with the oversaturation of college degrees in the workforce, and what that means for my employment, what that means for me personally investing thousands of dollars into the degree that I am currently pursuing. I feel like with the advent of AI, definitely, I feel like that has a huge effect on 99% of the workforce. I feel like a lot of jobs in the future are going to be very automated, especially entry-level jobs, where these jobs are seen as so crucial into entering the professional field. And if that suddenly gets robbed by AI, I feel like it's going to become very difficult for me and a lot of other students as well to find a place in the job market. So in that way, I feel like AI's reshaping of the economy and its diminishing of labor needs is something that I am very terrified of, and definitely not really understanding how Trump's administration is planning to address or limit the uses of AI in the future is definitely something that's very concerning for me. Now, I believe over 40% of students, or of Generation Z students, are pursuing a bachelor's degree or some kind of higher education. But I honestly feel like a bachelor's degree is not what it once was. And it's kind of like what that right-wing rhetoric is saying about college being a scam. And I can't really help but question the truth of that, because I feel like with the advent of AI and its emphasis on a lot of hard skills, someone once told me that the way you get into a job isn't about what you study in college, but about the experiences and the hard skills that you wield. And it kind of puts into question what the value of an American college degree is. And that's definitely something that I have to grapple with, especially with the rising cost of higher education, stagnant wages, increased reliance on student loans, and how that disproportionately burdens a lot of middle-class students. And just like something else I would like to rope in as well is how universities are continuously supporting this military industrial complex. Universities have had a very long-standing relationship with wartime spending, definitely investing in a lot of defense companies, awarding board positions to military industry executives, and definitely like the STEM to war pipeline that a lot of research universities provide. And I feel like that is definitely a misallocation of our resources, of our tuition, of our endowments that could be better used to, I guess, provide students with more resources to actually secure a job in the workplace. So, for example, U.S. spending on Israel's military operations since last year have reached over $22 billion, and universities have had a large effect and a large say in that funding. And I definitely feel like with policy in the future, universities really need to reorient, I guess, the practical use of what a college degree can provide and what students are really paying for. So that's definitely something that I'm very concerned about.
That's nothing. It's not even half of Yale's endowment. It's a small pittance that's been given to Israel. Anybody else want to say anything about or respond?
I guess like one point I've been thinking about, especially now that we're talking about like mobilizing youth and also like university students as well. Like we did have a campaign that had some certain, I don't know, clear policies, and that was like Bernie Sanders' campaign, where the sort of unifying everyone was around the fact that like student debt is a huge problem and how do we fix that. And I think at least that really mobilized me to get involved and be really interested in that. And I think at that time it was a radical thing to want to support Bernie Sanders. And I think like if a similar candidate was here now, it might not be as radical, and that's just how things are moving. So I guess the question of, can we see leadership and people in power who are bringing these ideas? I think we all like mentioned a few different clear policies or things that we want to center around. And I was thinking about the different types of people that might center around, for example, the burden, like jobs because of AI. A lot of people across any spectrum would be concerned about that. I know, like I see that in my job where I build AI for hospitals, and a lot of the people were like automating a lot of sort of documentation work. And some of our users are nurses who are older, and they come to me and have complained that I'm worried. I don't want to use the app that you built because I'm worried that it's taking credit for my job. And that is somebody who's 60 in a hospital. And then Richard just mentioned a similar concept that he's facing being a university grad. Like there are unifying concepts that people are concerned about. If we like align and organize around them now, can we sort of can we bring up like radical ideas that we actually want to see happen?
I have a really brief comment to make about what AI talk reminded me of. I feel like it's really interesting now that we as like people who intend to go to college or are college grads or in college are like really concerned about, AI taking our jobs. I think that kind of reflects how back when America started giving all the factory jobs to other nations and outsourcing manufacturing and all those jobs, the lower class were the ones concerned about the effects of globalization taking their jobs. And now I think us being concerned about AI and the technological advances is kind of just like a repeat of history, but this time I feel like we're putting more emphasis on it because it affects people closer to the upper class, if that kind of makes sense. I feel like people have always been scared of losing their jobs to other factors. And I think with AI, it's interesting because it's affecting college graduates who I feel like always have been considered like the top tier of like the social stature. Like, oh, they have a degree, their job should be valued more than ones that don't. And I feel like when other those jobs of non-college graduates had been at risk, we hadn't gotten as much as discussion about it. If that kind of makes sense.
It does. It makes a ton of sense, Ishani. And I think that the college education is one way that if you have the means to get there, that's your shot at ascending in term economically in this country. But that's the catch. It's a shot. It's a chance. It's not guaranteed. And the way, just to like tie things together, the fact that now the shot of going to college, first of all, super expensive, only getting more expensive. And that might not even promise you a job anymore. It might be too competitive when you leave. Is I think now changing the subject from this is you just have to work harder and you just have to learn and you'll make it. It's changing that idea of work, and now more of an idea of we don't really have control over where this country might be going, and maybe politically we might have recourse to make sure that when there's in AI regulations, there's maybe a plan to employ people to make sure that for a certain amount of jobs that are lost for AI, they're created in some other way. And those are the things that I think our government should be helping us with. And it's unfortunate now that compared to in the past, maybe industrialization taking away jobs from farmers who would have done the work manually, I think a person living in a city like I am in the middle of Manhattan wouldn't have cared, would have just been like, okay, well, we get food faster. But where I am now is I'm now forced to care because as a person in a white collar job, I'm thinking, well, I don't really want to lose opportunity. So I think that's I think the idea of class is coming into here too. And now I'm forced to now think about my own biases and my own blind spots too.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Ashton said. And I think that the entire conversation about identity, we relate back to identity, like who we are, our countries, our skin color. While those are all really important, I think what we've learned, and I think a lot of Gen Z is coming to this epiphany of like the bottom line and the most quote unquote important aspect of your identity is whether you are part of the elite or not. And so that's even something that we saw with Kamala. She was a Black woman, but at the end of the day, she is a part of the elite. She isn't, she whether that be like economically, her economic standing, her political standing, that bottom line of whether you are a person who is elite, whether you are someone who's wealthy, whether you're part of the working class, that is truly the separation between the type of life that you have. And I think now more than ever, people are getting riled up and they're wanting to see this huge overturn of the I think worship of the elite in this country and the amount of power and influence that they hold. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you're from. Of course, there are racial, layers to everything, but your identity as an elite person, as a wealthy person, is what gets you through those doors. Even with what Richard was saying about jobs, about college, about getting into these legacy schools, that all goes back to your status as a wealthy person or not. And I think that realization is really pushing us to want to have this quote unquote revolution. But I think it's going to take a lot of time for us to figure out where that stands. Like there have been calls of people just like, we're not going to go to work. We're not going to pay for this. We're not going to do that. So that kind of like workers' revolution, I think is, I do see it as an option that people are now genuinely considering because of where they've reached, where we've reached as a society in America.
One of the paradoxes that I just think I that sort of became clear to me is that in hearing the story of a Mexican American immigrant explaining why their mother would have voted for Trump, it may very well be that immigrant's status in this country, or desiring even to be here in the first place, is the result of policies enacted, supported 20, 30 years ago under Bill Clinton, the Democrat, who supported the North and Central American free trade agreements that disturbed, if not obliterated, much of the labor, the conditions of labor throughout this, well, really this entire continent. And so it's wild. So if Democrats are upset about why they might have lost this last election, they need to think back to their own policies going 30 years ago, and maybe they might find. But I think that speaks to some of the paradox that we're caught up in this electoral structure. One question that I believe, if I'm having a Saturday's experience on Sunday, that Renee organized for me to bring up here is from not Sard. There's some media that analyzes the rightward trend of Gen Z boys and leftward for Gen Z girls. Do the panelists see this play out in their day-to-day experiences? Wow. I haven't seen this data, but does this ring true to any of you that your generation's boys and young men are moving to the right and young women to the left?
I also don't know the exact data on this, but I know that it is a valid trend. I talked a little bit about this yesterday, but just from my own personal life, I really have seen this. My town, Maplewood, is very liberal, very blue, and I see boys in my grade voting differently from their families who are voting blue and who voted for Trump and who are quite out and proud about it. And I think this is a result of I've kind of been trying to form the connections in my head, and I do think it has a lot to do with career opportunity and with their economic concerns post graduating. But I also think some of it more socially has to do with this general rape culture. And I think, for a lot of women, emphasis on Trump being, a rapist, that's not the first time we've had someone in office like that. But a lot of women kind of almost begging their male counterparts to be listen to why we wouldn't want this person in office and why this is representation of how our country treats its women, and them kind of ignoring that. And then we see also, I don't know, and I think social media especially, looking at trends up until the election, we kind of see this reverting back to kind of classical nuclear family structures with the trad wife movements and these these family influencers and these traditional Christian evangelical norms that are just constantly just everywhere, and it's surrounding us all. And then I know Zoe brought up yesterday kind of self-deprecating language when it comes to women, saying I'm just a girl, I don't, and this idea of marrying rich, or that girl math, and all of these ideas that are very, it's kind of I don't know, attacking our generation from the inside out. And I think it's really effective propaganda. And then on the flip side, we see, some women rejecting this idea with movements in Korea to just kind of decenter men and just completely cut them off. And this very big divide, not just, bipartisan, but now this gender divide when it comes to, social issues.
I agree. I think there is a divide, but I had the stats. The Circle is a Tufts political center. They reported that young women preferred Harris to Trump by a 17-point margin, specifically 58% Harris to 41% Trump. But young men preferred Trump by a 14-point margin, so 56% preferred Trump as opposed to 42% of men preferred Harris. I think social trends are an interesting point to bring up with the trad wife movement, girl boss, etc. I don't think these inform political decisions as much. I think a lot of women participating in them might just think they're fun, like girl dinner and girl math. I think the bigger issue is that, like we kind of reiterated earlier, a big point of the Democratic platform was reproductive rights, which of course is of much more concern to women, like young women, than it is to young men. I think young women maybe just couldn't identify with the topics that were discussing, and I feel like I saw a lot of discussion of this in the live chat already, but I know a lot of people are talking about oh, the draft is going to come back, and I think I don't know how true that is or how necessarily how accurate that is, but I feel like that fear is definitely something that's more ingrained in our young men, and because they're the ones that would be enlisted in this case, and I feel like they might feel a bit more isolated and a bit more in danger. While I'm not sure if Trump is actually going to address these concerns, they might feel like Trump is a better representation of them than Harris is.
I can't say that I have seen these trends play out for myself, probably because of this. I don't want to say I'm in a bubble because I talk to a lot of people, but I guess at a certain point we are in our own bubbles. And I don't think I've seen the trend. I think, if anything, I've maybe seen, it's possibly that I have, now that I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about criticisms of the Democratic Party to that we should move with the country, that the fact that the country, I look at this as a fact that the country has moved to the right in its politics. There's criticisms that Kamala Harris wasn't right enough. And I don't know how you move her over to the right without putting her outside of the Democratic Party. But I think maybe that's what I've seen in my social media and my conversations with friends, that we expected our candidate to move over, and that she was insufficient in some way, which I don't agree with.
I think it's also important to kind of talk about, like where that data is coming from and like who's putting out those statistics and stuff like that and what kind of messaging it sends. Because I think there's a way to balance it. I mean, it doesn't make sense to make broad generalizations that like, oh, like all men in our generation are leaning one way or leaning another way, or even smaller generalizations than that. Um, but I think there's still a lot of validity to recognizing, like, especially when it comes to the internet, because our generation is so engrossed in that. Um, like recognizing the very real pipelines that do exist. Like, I mean, there is the alt-right pipeline, which even I've witnessed that. Like, I remember as a kid, I used to like watching like a lot of video game stuff on YouTube, and I remember like even just watching a video and off the corner, like in the recommended would be like top 10 feminists get owned and stuff like that. Like there's clear faults within the algorithms that run the social media that we're working with that do link certain content and market certain content, and that content gets diffused one way or another, depending on a whole host of analytics. But so there's, I think, a balance to this conversation about recognizing like what that data means depending on where it's coming from and who's compiling it, but also recognizing like, I don't want to say more qualitative things, but like recognizing like the more tangible examples that we can kind of look at and target and stuff like that.
Right. Anybody else? Okay. So just looking at the clock, it seems like a good time to start thinking about some concluding thoughts about where we're going forward, where we're going from here, what you all are maybe thinking about doing in terms of engaging media, activism, organizing, to the extent that we're focusing on electoral politics. Maybe what strategies do you think you might consider over the next 4 years? To maybe advance the discussion, open up some alternatives, or just anything that you wanted to make sure you conveyed this evening that maybe you haven't had a chance to, or want to reiterate something. But if not, just in general, the question is pointing to what's next. How do you want to move forward, or how do you
I
see
can
yourselves
start.
engaging moving forward? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I think in an ideal world, our politicians, we elect them once and they do their job, local, state, federal, whatever they are, they do their job and they find out what we would like as their constituents. But that's not how change happens. Change happens from people forcing politicians to listen and to understand perspectives, and also through conversations with people in our own communities. So starting with that, I also want to say that I think when I was maybe a teenager, maybe, when I was maybe around 17, 18, I thought, wow, I can't wait until our generation, the one with who knows how to use the internet efficiently, who knows how to get all the information we need. I can't wait until we are in charge, because with all that we know, like with the fact that phones have videos now, we can see police brutality firsthand wherever we are. We can see how people have really, just to generalize it, have been oppressed, and there's video evidence of it. I thought that that was going to make a huge change. And I think what the internet has become now is a way to, I don't want to say, well, yeah, maybe to a degree, through propaganda, indoctrinate people, kind of separate people, make sure that whatever point of view people have, they stay in their one place. So I think that makes things a little, I'm a little pessimistic, and normally I'm very optimistic as how I look to the future. So I don't know. I think a part of this is creating more powerful ways of reaching people and instilling the curiosity, instilling a care for one another. And I think that it's possible, but the job might have become harder with the internet and not easier, which is what I don't think I saw coming.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think with the internet, there's just so much information to process, and it becomes very hard to make informed decisions, especially when a lot of media on social media is seen as propaganda, and how it's warped by AI, and how we are pretty much at war with AI and the algorithm, and how, let's say, if we kind of concede to one identity, how that one singular identity continues to be reinforced on our algorithms. And I really do feel like it paralyzes the opportunity for discussion. So definitely, as I look to the future, I think we need to have a larger focus on a lot of relational organizing. So actually having those conversations with people next to us. I remember on my campus, we had this group called the Pen Dems, and they would basically just stay on like the walks of campus, basically like getting in our faces and telling us to vote one way for these reasons. And the results really spoke for themselves. Since the 2020 election, over 4,000 additional ballots have been cast on campus by students. And I feel like if we were to continue this on a more macro scale, then we are going to achieve a lot more success. Because definitely when someone's speaking to you and having those dialogues with you in person, it definitely feels a lot more personal than someone giving you a phone call or knocking on your door for a brief moment. So definitely, Dr. Ball, my question for you is how you see the ways AI are going to affect the ways we interpret and parse a lot of information, and whether you believe like some limitations to AI is warranted or not.
I'll give a very short answer. Many limitations should be put on AI. Many, 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 many. Algorithms are not autonomous, disconnected from society's features. They are extensions of society's ideological algorithms, so to speak. So there needs to be a lot of checks put on it. It's already going to have already having and will have a worse impact on the labor force as well, because as we've already seen, automation removes jobs, and those people who lose jobs don't get to enjoy the fruits of the wealth produced and enjoy time off. They just get dispersed into ever lower rungs of the economy. So lots of problems ahead, and Elon Musk being in charge at all is not going to help either. So
I guess.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Right, on the topic of Elon Musk and his involvement in Ukraine and Russia, and how he pretty much single-handedly prevented Ukraine from taking back Crimea, and how he's essentially acting as like a head of state and has the power of to use these military tools and technology. I guess how do you see that developing now that he is being appointed by Trump?
I'm sorry. I feel like did you ask, were you asking me what I think about him being?
I was asking you or panelists, just how do we see Elon Musk, how that's developing now?
He paid hundreds of millions of dollars to get appointed there. So to me, this is a perfect example of the lie that the right always want to tell, that they want less government, when in reality, they just want government to protect and manage their interests. And that's what they're doing. So again, I think very short version is that he's going to make things much, much worse going forward. And that people, and this is sort of why I keep wanting us to think more about how we engage electoral politics and advancing a different set of politics and policies and ideas and agendas, because they're playing a very different game. But yeah, so I think there's major problems ahead for sure.
Yeah, I think something I mentioned in the beginning was how I was feeling that we're still within the bounds of two major parties that everyone feels like they need to vote within. So I guess looking towards the future, I would love to see and I think we are seeing Rudolph Ware. He announced that he is running for the position of governor of California as a Green Party candidate. So something like that, supporting these kinds of candidates and seeing the growth of the Green Party, so where it becomes more mainstream, is definitely something that I am kind of putting my energies towards as a solution and as a way forward, so that at least we have other policies, other people at play from different backgrounds with different ideologies, and who kind of reject the traditional political path and protecting certain interests within those political parties. I think that's something constructive and something substantial that we could do as a generation, is working with voting for those candidates and seeing a path of the future where we don't have just two political parties that are pitted against each other. And as we've seen in this election, they've essentially become one and the same with certain issues, whether that be like the alliance with Israel, with certain economic things. There's been a huge line blurred between the Democratic and Republican Party, and so I think as the generation where we now have this power of voting and being politically involved, we have to make the choice to kind of invest and organize other avenues within other parties and put action behind that, so that there might be another future for us to consider.
To jump back to Jared's point about kind of working against people who have interests very different from ours, and to kind of echo what Alice said, I think we're kind of, or maybe forgetting is not the right word, but I think maybe we've kind of lost some of the fire, I guess, that we kind of used to have as a generation. Like recently I kind of I don't know if you say remembered, but I don't know if you guys remember, like 4 years ago, it was during COVID and it was during the last election. It was during COVID, everybody was like isolating and social distancing. There were a whole bunch of Gen Z members, like I think in the 100,000s, who just, I think, coming together on the internet, kind of agreed to buy out a whole bunch of tickets to Trump's Tulsa rally, and basically bought out so many tickets that Trump's analytics like went up crazy, and he was expecting like a huge massive turnout, and he ended up having something like 6,000 people show up when he was expecting something like 60,000. And I remember seeing like kind of how members of our generation were explaining their reasoning for doing that. And it was like, well, I can't vote, so this is my act of protest. This is how I'm expressing that I don't want this candidate, that I don't like this candidate. And if that's what we were doing 4 years ago, I don't know why it almost seems like we're not advancing from that idea almost. Like, I mean, for me, I was 14 at the time, but I think we kind of need to go back to kind of getting creative with how we're working against this A framework, and B, like the more immediate systems we're in. I mean, we're facing a possibility of just passively inheriting a government system and a government theater that doesn't cater to what we need, that doesn't cater to the future we're trying to envision. And I mean, if we don't start trying to claim ownership of that space, if we don't start recognizing the power and the need to have our voice in that space, in the government and in the US political theater, if you'll call it that, we're going to passively inherit something that's not going to work for us, when instead we can be taking on an active role and really trying to shape policy to match our needs and to build a better future and build the kind of future that our generation wants to see. But I think we need to get creative about it.
I agree. And I think another point that I want to bring up as we like approach the end of this panel, and kind of like on the AI point that was brought up earlier by Sadie, Richard, and Jared, I think AI is just, I think the government and like the federal government, the deep state, whatever you want to refer to, like an elite class, I think AI is just another great way to like I feel like it is easier to control people when the people are dumber and they're more reliant and more ignorant. It's just the truth. And with AI and these other forms of technology, we become more reliant on AI. We become more like mindless zombies. And unless we critically think, the more that, like, as a generation, we rely on these systems, and the more we're distracted we get by other issues, is the easier it is for them to perpetrate whatever agenda or whatever they wish to do, whether it be Elon Musk, the CIA, etc. And I feel like AI, whether it be AI or these AI or just like social issues that they're like micro fighting about, it might just be a way it might be a way it serves as like a bigger distraction than anything, and it leads to us not focusing on the wider issues, the most concerning issues, which is what the US is doing overseas, what the US is doing to its people, what the US is really like, you never ask the US what it's doing. You never ask a woman its weight, and you never ask the US what it's doing in Syria. Like, I think these are all like distractions and ways to make the population more subservient and more ignorant, and that way they can't exactly question what the government's doing. And I think it's really important after this panel and just in the next 4 years for us to ask more questions, for us to be more strict in our kind of denial and our rejection of the killing of like genocides occurring across the world, and just this kind. And like I don't know if anyone listened to the interview that Tucker Carlson had with the foreign minister in Russia recently, but it kind of suggests that the U.S. Department is behaving as if it's ready for a nuclear standoff, with the fact that it's currently like bombing. It's currently going bombing campaigns in Russia right now, and the U.S. is approaching a sort of like state of war with big powers. And I think as the American people, it should be our job to really advocate against that. But right now, the U.S. government is trying to like distract us and make us focus on other issues. And I feel like AI is a part of that, because if we become more reliant on AI in other forms, we start thinking less for ourselves, which is I think critical thinking is probably the biggest enemy to the government or the elite class. To like summarize my thoughts.
Right on. So we do have a couple of questions here from Renee and Josie. What is something you wish you understood coming into the election that you learned after the election that may have affected how you voted or see electoral politics?
I think I wish I understood how vile the misogynoir would be, the combination of the hate against the Black woman. And it's not just hate against Black people. It's not just hate against women. It's both of those things. And that is a unique experience Black women go through. And I didn't think I would see it play out in front of my eyes in the severe manner that it did. And I didn't think I would see no one care about it and kind of actually blame Kamala Harris for it, blame her for not being Black enough, not being feminine enough. And I think the day after, we get a bunch of political appointments that, to me, seem motivated not by quality, not by experience, but by, I don't know what they're motivated by. I have to assume it's motivated by putting the least qualified person at the head of these agencies to destroy them. I'm thinking, what if I worked in HHS in the FDA or something like that, and now RFK's my boss? I would probably go insane, and I'd want to leave if I had gone to college to learn about public health, learn about pharmaceuticals, maybe learn about food safety, and now I'm beholden to someone who doesn't have my same qualification. So to summarize that, I wish I knew how bad it would get, because people were telling me it's going to get pretty ugly. And I thought, well, what could they do in front of all of our eyes that would be that ugly? For example, Donald Trump found Black women journalists, went and said that within the first 5 minutes he was there, he said, "I have never heard a comment so nasty in my life," in front of an audience. I think it was an HBCU, I'm forgetting. But essentially, what I'm saying is using the identity of a Black woman as something that she should be ashamed of, that using it to really pejoratively, when in fact it is her strength. I think that is what surprised me, and I wish I prepared myself for before the election.
It was the National Association of Black Journalists, by the way, that took place. Right. And I'm sure you're invited to check out Saturdays with Renee. I think you would enjoy the back and forth on that topic. Anybody else thoughts on that?
I can also only imagine, besides lack of qualification, that it was very much motivated by money too. Something I wish I understood before the election, I think, was just how pervasive and subtle the propaganda could get. Like some of the things that I encountered during the election season this year were just so subtle, I didn't even realize it. I mean, like calling Harris Kamala as sort of a means to familiarize her to voters and stuff like that, like stuff that was just so subtle as that, to me really stood out and was something that I don't know if I was fully ready for going into the election season, was just how pervasive all of it could get.
All right. If no one else has a pressing response.
Wait, I'd like to
Richard,
add.
go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, something I definitely wasn't as aware of before coming into this election is, I guess, to the extent the Democratic Party has kind of abandoned the working class and abandoned what its initial foundation was, being this idea of economic populism. I feel like the Democrats are definitely too, at least in the current state, too tied in plutocracy themselves to make any kind of effective populist critique of Trump's corruption. So just something that I recently found out about was how kind of Harris was kind of endorsing this plutocracy. For example, she allowed a lot of her Wall Street donors who did fund a significant portion of her campaign to veto any shaming of those who engaged in price gouging. So yeah, definitely to Ashton and Zoe's point before of Kamala not really being an effective representation of her identity and following suit with that was a major problem or a major shortcoming of this election, and definitely something that I've only realized upon retrospection as well. And just kind of like this need for how the Democratic Party really does need to restructure their relationship with the working class moving forward, because that, again, is that philosophical underpinning of democracy and how we now have abandoned that. So I think this election has been a massive waking up, forgive me for my stumble, but yeah, definitely definitely a huge aha moment for me, and hopefully a lot of other people, and how where the Democratic Party stands and its disparities with its working class, and how that really needs to be revised.
Really, really quickly, if I can, I agree with Zoe, and I'm actually going to kind of disagree with Ashton a little bit. I think the propaganda was really real and talking so much about Kamala being a Black woman, and I don't think that's why she lost the election. And I talked about this yesterday, but like when, you know, Kamala lost, like mourning, I was like, okay, wait, I'm not going to see a woman that looks like me in office. But then I kind of deconstructing that and realizing that like she's not representative of Black liberation. She's not representative of all of these like ideals that like I was like subconsciously associating with her identity. And so it's kind of like representation for representation's sake. And like that's not progressive, that's not productive. And this wouldn't have changed my decision or anything, but the just having further knowledge about, this is kind of unrelated, but about Schedule F or Executive Order 13957, I believe, which is a plan for Trump. There was so much focus on Project 2025 and what that would mean for more of these like social changes, but it's executive order that he's going to try to pass that is going to reclassify civil servant like service positions within the federal government. So he's effectively able to fire and hire all of these federal employees that are like right now untouchable from this. So that's a really scary, real issue that could just further his power and shows kind of the erasure of our democracy and all of that. Sorry, I know we're getting near the end of the time.
No, it's all good. Thank you very much. And thank all of you. And as Josie, you come back, I want to just thank you and Renee for putting this together, inviting us and me to participate. And man, it's been great. Thanks, everybody. Josie, take it over.
Yeah, thanks. I'd love for Renee to come on. Renee is also part of, she's part of so many things, right? She's also part of Public Square Amplified. And thank you so much for giving us this platform. But not, when I say us, not Public Square Amplified alone, but sort of this particular voice. I think it says, I think the conversation sort of raises all sorts of things about around the gutting of public education, the narrowing of ideas in the media and press, whether or not we're in a society that is really engaged in critical thinking and assessment and allowing spaces for radical redesign of a society. And when we say radical, we don't mean that for some, we think of sort of major transformation or something like January 6th. We're actually speaking about ways in which working class students and activists are showing up in spaces and broadening spaces to think about a new world. And we really have to think about a new world, right? So listening to the conversation today encourages me around the work that we're doing in press and media, construction of narratives, telling stories from the periphery, centering voices that are not part of conversations around transformation, radical political transformation. So that's the work that we want to engage in, so that we're thinking about ways in which we are thinking collaboratively about a democracy and not supporting a republic. And I think the last time I sort of characterized America as a pay-to-pay republic. And we've seen that, and we're seeing that, and what's going to happen in 2025. I'm looking forward to hearing what these 7 young people we have will say about 100 days after the current administration. How we reconciling our sort of, contradictions within ourselves. We all have contradictions. How we reconciling those to to support a singular objective of a planet that survives. And that planet survives if we challenge capitalism. That planet survives if we challenge war. And so the work that we want to do at Public Square Amplified is to tell stories and create and build citizens that are pushing against war and pushing against capitalism and pushing against the burning of the planet and fighting for the human rights for everyone. I'm so glad.
Josie, does it just stop at 2 hours, Jared? I want to know if we're live. Does it just
thank
stop?
you so much.
No, it doesn't. No. We no. And I know Renee's used to us being up against warrior class and us being just afraid of running over. No, we're good. We're good.
No, I just wanted to make sure Josie, you could finish your thought, Josie. But in my head, I was like, is it about to just shut off because we're at
no.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Let me say, the reason that Public Square Amplified is doing so well and building into our fourth year is because Renee Johnson does exactly that. She is political writer and she is technician, and she keeps us straight and on task. And so she's able to juggle so many things. And so we love her, and we couldn't have Public Square without her. So thank you for that. And I am Caribbean, so I'm long-winded. And I will interrupt my long-windedness. So I want everyone who is sort of hearing these 7 people, they're bringing their different ideas and different perspectives. They're bringing sort of their orientation in their philosophical ideas about who they are in the world. And what our job is at Public Square Amplified, and I hope Black Liberation Media and other spaces, is how we engaging in the progression and evolution of ideas and critical thinking, how we get into a point where the planet isn't burning, that capitalists aren't creating new spaces to leave the planet and sort of leave it to working class and poor people. And so I'm so happy to be associated with these 7 people. Thank you so much, and so happy, Jared Ball, for you having us here and moderating this panel. And I hope you will continue to be kind and considerate to us and support these conversations, because I think these are the people we want to sort of begin to expose and have conversations with, because when data analysis is done, these are the people who are being surveyed, and sort of how we sort of re-engaging our ideas about the future of the world with young people who are in the belly of the beast of corporate America, and so I'm so thankful to be here, and I want to thank you all for showing up. And Renee, where are you, Renee? Yeah, Renee, I don't know if you have any comments.
I'm here, and then I'll let Jared close out. So
thank you, Jared.
Before George Jackson was killed in the yard at San Quentin, and he was writing and sharing his thoughts. One of the many things that he wrote that stands out to me so much because of the time lapse that has happened since he wrote it and now, and how still absolutely point on it was, as he says, settle your quarrels, come together, understand the reality of our situation, understand that fascism is already here, that people are already dying who could be saved, that generations will live more poor, butchered half-lives if you fail to act. Do what must be done, discover your humanity and your love in revolution. And I read that today, actually, in Boston, when I was speaking to the group at the community church. And I read it now as a reminder that we are perpetually living in a state of fascism and lies and propaganda and nonsense, right? And the goal is to keep you consistently on this wheel of struggle so that you don't actually fight the real enemy, which is capitalism and imperialism and colonialism and white supremacy and all these things. And I beg of you all to continue to read and to be open to theories and conversations and thoughts that maybe are not so in line with what you already believe, right? Because we can't move forward if we're just sitting in this perpetual space that we're in right now. The chat's been very interesting. The chat is always interested in us here. And I want to remind everybody that these are young people, right? Like I was not born with my politics. I was not born with my thought process. I was not born with my ability to research and to learn and to do all those things. These are things that come with time and with growth and with age and with conversation. And I encourage you all to continue to move in courage, because it is courageous, even when you're saying the thing that a lot of people already say. And if you're agreeing with people who maybe not all of the radicals agree with, it's still courageous to say it out loud. And this is it's a big space, right? A lot of people are going to watch this. A lot of people did watch this. Yes. And I'm proud of all of you. And I'm very, very thankful that you all, stood strong and you participated. And it's not always an easy thing to do as a young person. It's not an easy thing to do as a 50-year-old. Jared got a little bit of time on me. It's not always easy to do as Jared. So, I applaud you all, and I thank you. Thank you very much for your time. And Jared, I'm gonna pass it to you to do the final closeout.
No, thank you very much. And absolutely, it's been an honor. And I am very glad no one had a mic and camera on me when I was their age. Very glad. So thank you all very much. Thanks to those who were joined us in the chat and elsewhere. And as always, peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And we'll see you like Garvey in the whirlwind. Peace, everybody. Take care. Thanks again.
Peace.
Thanks. Take care.